Welcome to the Shadow of History channel. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out more videos like this one. Shot in the neck, head and back shortly after beginning his solo march to encourage Black Americans to vote in 1966. Civil rights activist James Meredith, the first black man integrated into the University of Mississippi, survived the attack and still lives in Mississippi today at age 88. Born in Frankfurt in 1929, Anne Frank documented her years in hiding from Nazi persecution across the Netherlands between 1942 and 1944. And though she did not survive the Holocaust, her diary was published posthumously and made her one of the most widely recognized Jewish victims of World War II. In July 1904, Theodore Roosevelt Jr. died of a heart attack at 56 while serving in Normandy, becoming the second of former President Theodore Roosevelt's sons lost to war, following his younger brother Quentin, a pilot killed in action over France during World War I. During the liberation of the Netherlands in May 1945, a member of the Dutch Interior Forces found a quiet moment of levity, using a German target for personal entertainment amid the hard-fought freedom his country had finally reclaimed after years of occupation. In 1945, following the liberation of France, a woman accused of collaborating with German occupiers has her head forcibly shaved by two men restraining her, a practice carried out across France targeting women known as femmes d'endu, marking them publicly for their alleged wartime betrayal. In the summer of 1944, amid the fierce Battle of Normandy, U.S. Army Private First Class Fred Linden of Detroit holds a young French boy in the newly liberated village of Trevière, a quiet human moment amid the chaos of one of history's most pivotal military campaigns. Meeting for the first time as the Big Three Allied leaders, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill gathered at the Tehran Conference in 1943, where despite arriving with differing objectives, they reached their most significant agreement: the Western Allies' commitment to open a second front against Nazi Germany. Armed with poles, boiling water, and bayonets, the O'Halloran Sisters of Ireland stood their ground against evicting officers in 1887, defending their family home with fierce determination during the turbulent period of the Irish Land War. In July 1918, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, their 5 children, and 4 servants were led to a cellar under the pretense of a photograph, where a dozen armed men suddenly entered and executed the Romanov family, ending 300 years of Imperial Russian rule. Photographed in Tululak, California in 1939 by Dorothea Lange, this mother and child embody the quiet suffering of millions during the Great Depression, a period when Lange dedicated herself to documenting the desperate living conditions of unemployed and migrant workers across America. Escorted by United States Marshals down the steps of William Frantz Elementary in 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges became the first African-American child to attend a white elementary school in the South, selected as one of 6 black children chosen for enrollment in New Orleans' previously all-white school system. Standing together near their B-17 Flying Fortress at MacDill Field, Florida in 1944, Kiowa Nation members Gus Palmer, a side gunner, and aerial photographer Horace Pula served their country with distinction, representing a people whose language, Kawi-Joga, had dwindled to only 20 speakers by 2012. In 1906, workers for the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company in Michigan gather before descending into the copper mines below, beginning another long and grueling shift in the depths of the earth that powered much of America's industrial age. On the Western Front in 1916, a British soldiers' football team poses wearing gas masks, a striking image that captures both the dark humor and grim reality of a war so defined by chemical weapons that it became known to history as the Chemists' War. On the 25th of May 1919, Vladimir Lenin stood before Sevastopol troops on Red Square in Moscow, reviewing a compulsory military training force established just the year before to consolidate Soviet power against the remaining opposition to Bolshevik rule. In 1917, Vladimir Lenin led the Bolshevik Party to seize power across Russia during the October Revolution, an event that dismantled centuries of imperial rule and inaugurated the Soviet regime that would shape world history for decades to come. On his final day of recovery in a French hospital in 1918, an American soldier rests quietly, knowing that when morning comes he must leave behind the relative safety of his bed and return once more to the front lines of the war. On the Eastern Front in 1916, Jewish soldiers serving in the German army observed Hanukkah together, a reminder that amid the vast machinery of World War I, soldiers of many faiths held on to their traditions even in the harshest conditions of war. Arrested in 1903 for advocating a violent general strike after fleeing Italy to avoid military conscription, a young Benito Mussolini had his mugshot and fingerprints taken by police 2 decades before this committed socialist would rise to become the fascist dictator of Italy in 1922. Grant Wood's iconic 1930 painting American Gothic, named for the Gothic architectural style of the background farmhouse, depicts not a husband and wife as widely assumed, but Wood's own sister, Nan Wood Graham, standing beside their dentist, Dr. Byron McKeeby, who served as the models for this enduring American image. In the late 1800s, long before modern tourism, curious visitors and their local guides made the ambitious climb up the ancient stone slabs of an Egyptian pyramid, treating one of the world's oldest wonders as a playground of personal adventure. Standing together atop the structure he designed and built, Gustave Eiffel and a companion explored the newly completed Eiffel Tower in Paris in 1889, the very year it was erected as the centerpiece of the Centennial Exposition celebrating 100 years of the French Republic. Hollywood icon Steve McQueen, as comfortable behind a wheel as he was in front of a camera, poses alongside his prized 1957 Jaguar XKS, a machine that matched his reputation for speed, style, and quiet, effortless cool. Neon signs, gridlock traffic, and the restless pulse of a city that never sleeps define this raw and vivid street-level photograph of Times Square, New York, captured in 1978 during one of the most turbulent and electric decades in the city's history. Cruising through city streets in 1912, this Kodak advertising truck turned everyday roads into a moving billboard, announcing the growing reach of a company that was quietly transforming how ordinary people captured and remembered their lives. Parked outside one of McDonald's earliest outlets in Des Plaines, Illinois in 1955, customers arrived at the dawn of a fast food revolution that would go on to reshape American eating habits and spread to nearly every corner of the world. In September 1917, 2 British nurses navigate the roads near Pervis behind the wheel of a sidecar, bringing medical care to the front lines of World War I with a quiet determination that defied every expectation of their era. Braving the brutal cold of Antarctica in January 1912, photographer Herbert Ponting stands beside his telephoto apparatus, capturing images from one of the most remote and unforgiving environments ever explored by human beings. Far from home and deep in a Korean winter, Canadian soldiers serving in the conflict of 1952 carved out a piece of their homeland by building a makeshift hockey rink, turning frozen ground into a brief but joyful reminder of who they were. Immaculately dressed and poised with quiet confidence, the cabin crew of American Airways posed for the camera in 1933, representing the early glamour of commercial aviation at a time when flying was still a rare and remarkable luxury. Unveiled in 1932, the Dynasphere, nicknamed Jumbo, was inventor J.A. Purvs's peculiar vision of the future of transportation, a human-occupied vehicle shaped like a colossal tire that rolled forward with more curiosity than practicality. Parisians settle into the easy rhythm of a sidewalk cafe in 1925, sharing coffee and conversation in the golden afternoon light of a city that had perfected the art of turning an ordinary moment into something quietly extraordinary. Photographed in Norway in 1928, members of Scandinavia's indigenous Sami people appear in traditional dress, representing a culture with deep roots in the Arctic landscape that stretches back thousands of years before modern borders were ever drawn. At the Gilmore Serve-Yourself gas station in Los Angeles in 1948, drivers pulled up in gleaming post-war automobiles to fill their own tanks, part of a growing self-service culture, reshaping everyday American commerce after the war. Shot from directly above by photographer Andreas Feinger in 1944, Manhattan's dense grid of streets and skyscrapers stretches to the horizon in every direction, revealing the extraordinary geometric ambition of a city built upward as much as outward. Loaded down with brand new 1940 Plymouths, fresh from the factory, this automobile shippers Incorporated 1940 Dodge cab-over engine transporter captures the raw momentum of American manufacturing at full industrial stride just before the nation entered World War II. Beneath a billboard proclaiming the land of plenty, desperate men stand in a bread line in Ohio in 1937, an image so steeped in contradiction that it needs no explanation to communicate the crushing weight of the Great Depression. Strapping their equipment to a motorcycle in Toronto in 1912, these photographers embrace the speed of a new age, finding inventive ways to carry their bulky trade through streets still shared by horses and the first generation of motor vehicles. Around the turn of the 20th century, the Rue de la Roquette in Paris stood as a living portrait of working-class city life, its cobblestones and storefronts bearing quiet witness to the daily rhythms of a neighborhood that time has since transformed beyond recognition. Rumbling through city streets in 1916, this mail truck carried not just letters but a simple message on its side, urging citizens to save time by getting a mailbox, an early example of government agencies using advertising to shape public habit. In 1918, a young Charlie Chaplin stands at ease in front of Federal Hall on Wall Street, a fleeting moment that placed one of cinema's greatest icons in the very shadow of the building where George Washington once took the oath of office. Photographed in 1913 outside their premises in East Winnipeg, Manitoba, the staff of the Consolidated Bicycle and Motor Company of Notre Dame represent a pivotal moment when Canadian cities were quietly navigating the transition from pedal power to the combustion engine. In 1923, German children play with bricks of nearly worthless paper money, fashioning kites from currency that had been so devastated by post-war hyperinflation that a wheelbarrow full of banknotes could barely purchase a loaf of bread. Gathered together in the warm Sicilian sun sometime in the 1960s, an Italian wedding party captures the enduring traditions of Southern Italian life, family, celebration, and community, bound together with a joy that required no translation across cultures. At Liverpool Street Station in London in 1916, a trolley driver goes about his work amid the steady wartime churn of a city keeping itself moving, his calm expression a reminder that ordinary labor never paused even as the world around him transformed. Dressed in their finest and posed with quiet pride, an Iowan couple stand together on their wedding day in 1899, a photograph that preserves in silver and shadow the beginning of a life shared at the very turning of a century. Captured by photographer David Gonzalez in the South Bronx in 1979, young people dance freely on a New York street, reclaiming joy from a neighborhood that the rest of the city had written off, proving that vibrant culture can flourish even in hardship. Standing at her station inside the original Heinz factory in Pittsburgh in 1897, a female worker carefully fills bottles with ketchup, part of the early industrial workforce that built one of America's most enduring and recognizable food brands from the ground up. Near Northam, Minnesota in 1937, photographer Russell Lee captured Mrs. Orville White at her stove making pancakes for breakfast, a simple domestic scene that quietly documents the everyday rural life of Depression-era America with warmth and unadorned honesty. Still standing in the 1950s, the ancient walls of Constantinople rose from the earth as they had for over a millennium, silent, stone witnesses to the rise and fall of empires that had fought, conquered, and crumbled in the shadow of their ramparts. Rolling along Irish roads in the 1860s, the jaunting car offered passengers an open-air, side-facing ride that was as much a social experience as a mode of transport, becoming one of the most distinctly recognizable features of everyday Irish life in the Victorian era. At Haynes Corners Station in New York in 1902, the Catskill Mountain Railway brought passengers to the doorstep of one of the region's most beloved natural retreats, connecting city dwellers to mountain air at a time when the railroad was still the great democratizer of travel. In New Mexico in 1903, two Apache women tend a fire at their campsite, photographed at a time when indigenous communities across the American Southwest were navigating the immense pressures and upheavals brought by decades of displacement and forced assimilation. Somewhere on a golf course in the 1920s, the unglamorous task of retrieving lost and scattered golf balls falls to a patient worker, a behind-the-scenes glimpse at the quiet labor that kept the leisure pursuit of a prosperous decade running smoothly. Launched in 1975, the Pulsar combined a digital wristwatch with a calculator into a single device, representing the decade's fascination with miniaturized technology and offering a glimpse of a future where computation and everyday life would become inseparable. Photographed in 1916 atop a camel in the vast desert landscape that defined his legend, Colonel Thomas Edward Lawrence, the British soldier and writer the world would come to know as Lawrence of Arabia, cuts the unmistakable figure of a man already living inside history. At the Lockheed plant in Burbank, California in 1944, a female employee works with precision on a P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft, one of countless women who entered the American defense industry during World War II and proved indispensable to the war effort. Turning the camera on themselves in 1934, someone captured what may be one of the earliest known self-portraits in the photographic record, a moment of personal curiosity that places the human impulse for self-documentation decades ahead of the smartphone era. Around 1900, in the Munich suburb of Heidhausen, life along the Wolfgangstrasse carried on with the unhurried pace of a neighborhood that had not yet been reshaped by the forces of the century it was about to enter, its streets still belonging entirely to pedestrians and horses. In 1977, a gleaming row of brand-new automobiles rolls in on a transport carrier, arriving with the chrome-trimmed optimism of an industry still confidently churning out fresh designs every model year for an American public that had not yet stopped believing in the car as a symbol of personal freedom. At the Hampton Institute in Virginia in 1899, a class of students studied mathematical geography around a model of the Earth, receiving the kind of rigorous scientific education that the school's founders believed was both a right and a tool for the advancement of its predominantly black student body. Gathered around the supper table in Claiborne County, Tennessee in 1940, a farm family shares an evening meal that represents something larger than itself, the quiet endurance of rural American life during years of economic hardship and looming global uncertainty. Photographed in 1857, Abraham Lincoln stands with the characteristically unruly hair, that no formal occasion ever seemed fully capable of taming, a rare informal image of the man who would lead the nation through its most devastating internal conflict just 4 years later. Balanced on tall stilts in Faversham, England in 1920, hop pickers make their way through the fields with an unusual but practical elevation, a traditional site in the Kent countryside where the harvest of hops for brewing had shaped the rhythm of rural life for generations. Inside the elegant Illum department store in Copenhagen in 1904, ladies browsed displays of perfumes and jewelry, moving through a retail experience that was itself a relatively new invention, designed to make shopping a pleasure and an occasion rather than a simple transaction. In 1958, the record department of Woolworth's in Utica, New York, offers customers the chance to browse rows of vinyl albums, capturing a moment in the golden age of American retail, when a trip to the department store could end with a stack of music tucked under your arm. On a wash day in the 1890s in Natchez, Mississippi, women attend to the heavy and time-consuming labor of laundering clothes by hand, a recurring domestic task that demanded physical endurance and occupied entire days of the week before mechanization transformed household work. Photographed at the Costin Ostrich Farm in South Pasadena, California, sometime in the 1910s, an ostrich stares into the camera with characteristic indifference, representing a period when ostrich farming was a genuinely fashionable commercial enterprise driven by demand for feathers in women's fashion. Making his rounds in the 1920s, a postman goes about the dependable work of delivering correspondence by hand, representing a communication network that tied together communities, families, and commerce in the years before faster technologies began eroding the personal art of letter writing. Harnessed to an elegant carriage rolling through the streets of London in the 1890s, Lord Walter Rothschild's famous team of zebras drew the stares of every passerby, a display of eccentric wealth that only one of Britain's most prominent banking families could casually manage. In 1932, fishermen cast their lines from the stone embankment beneath the Pont Neuf in Paris, finding calm on the River Seine in the shadow of the city's oldest standing bridge, as Parisians had done for centuries before them and would continue to do long after. Standing beneath the nose of her Lockheed Electra in 1937, Amelia Earhart looks ahead with the composure of someone accustomed to facing the unknown. Photographed in the same year she would attempt the circumnavigation of the globe that ended in her mysterious and still unexplained disappearance. In New York City in 1919, opera star Fritzi Sheff demonstrates the Magnavox loudspeaker during the Fifth Liberty Loan Drive, lending her famous voice to the cause of promoting post-war government bonds through the remarkable new technology of amplified public sound. Posing proudly in 1900 with a basket full of freshly picked peanuts, this woman offers a glimpse into the agricultural labor of the era, her quiet dignity and direct gaze making her one of countless unidentified figures whose faces history preserved even as their names were forgotten. In 1913, engineers posed before the towering gates of a canal lock during the construction of the Panama Canal, standing at the threshold of an engineering achievement so vast and ambitious that it reshaped the commercial geography of the entire world. Perched atop Umbrella Rock on Lookout Mountain in Tennessee, in the early 1900s, visitors pose against the open sky, taking part in what had already become a beloved regional tradition of climbing to one of the South's most dramatic and peculiar natural landmarks. In 1940, a small boy named Warren breaks away and races toward his father, Private Jack Bernard, in one of the most emotionally honest photographs ever taken in Canada, capturing in a single frame the impossible weight of a wartime farewell between a parent and child. Strolling along Haberlandstrasse in Berlin in 1920, Albert Einstein walks with the unhurried ease of a man absorbed in private thought, photographed just 5 years after publishing the general theory of relativity that would permanently alter humanity's understanding of space, time, and gravity. Seated at her typewriter in 1917 at the Standard Neckwear Company on Essex Street in Boston, Miss Etha Solansky represents the growing generation of women entering the American office workforce, their skilled labor quietly reshaping the economy about to enter a new decade. In 1971, New York City's streets pulse with the layered energy of a metropolis in the middle of one of its most turbulent decades. A city straining under the weight of fiscal crisis and social change, while its sidewalks continued to buzz with irreducible, defiant life. In 1952, families sit inside their cars at a drive-in movie theater and share a meal as the film flickers on the giant screen before them, embodying the post-war American dream of leisure, convenience, and the open road compressed into a single summer evening. Tearing through the early roads of 1907, the Christie 20-liter V4 racer represented the raw, unrefined ambition of a motorized age still figuring out what speed meant. Its massive engine, a mechanical declaration that the era of horse-drawn limits was well and truly over. Behind the counter of his rural general store in 1939, a grocer hand-grinds fresh coffee for a customer in a shop that sold everything from batteries to bananas, the kind of all-purpose country establishment that served as the social and commercial center of small American communities. Gathered together in the California sunshine, in 1936, a wedding party marks the beginning of a new life. Their formal dress and careful poses a reminder that, even in the middle of the Depression decade, people still found the courage and the desire to celebrate love and commitment. In 1958, tourists at Disneyland wander through a plastic house of the future, marveling at a vision of modern domestic life that the park's designers promised would one day be within reach of every American family willing to believe in the promise of science and technology. Standing beside a roadside speed warning sign in Cordell, Oklahoma, around 1920, a couple poses with mild amusement at the era's cautious attempt to regulate the still novel and exhilarating danger of the automobile on roads that had barely been designed for it. Through the long windows of the RCA building at Rockefeller Center in 1932, workers are visible, laboring late into the evening, a quietly striking image of human effort and economic endurance captured in the very year that New York was building some of its most iconic monuments to ambition. In the 1920s, workers armed with shovels and horse-drawn equipment clear snow from city streets, a seasonal battle against winter that required enormous human effort in the years before mechanical plowing machinery made the work faster and the labor less visible. Dressed in their finest and shielded beneath elegant hats, New York society ladies attend the races at Belmont Park on Long Island in 1926, bringing to the grandstand the full pageantry of an era when even a day at the horses was an occasion for fashion and display. Photographed in Queens, New York in 1924, the William Ossenfort Deli on Rockaway Boulevard stands as a monument to the neighborhood delicatessen, the kind of family-run shop that fed entire communities and made the American immigrant experience legible one sandwich at a time. In the spring of 1975, more than 3,000 Vietnamese orphans were airlifted out of Saigon during Operation Babalift, transported to the United States as the war drew to its devastating close in one of the largest and most emotionally charged humanitarian evacuations of the 20th century. Rolling through city streets in 1934, a Coca-Cola dispensing truck offered cold drinks on demand to passers-by, a mobile ambassador for a brand that had spent decades making itself synonymous with refreshment, American identity, and the simple pleasure of an ice-cold bottle in your hand. Photographed from across the River Seine at the Exposition Universelle of 1900, the Eiffel Tower rises behind the vast geodesic globe celeste, two monuments to human ingenuity standing side by side in a Paris that had briefly made itself the center of the world's imagination. Parked proudly in San Francisco in 1922, the Peters Brothers shoe repair promotional car, built in the unmistakable shape of a giant shoe, turned every street it traveled into an advertisement, proving that in the age of the automobile, imagination was the most powerful form of marketing. On August 13, 1969, Michigan Avenue in Chicago erupted in celebration as the city welcomed home the three astronauts of Apollo 11, the men who had walked on the moon just weeks earlier and returned to a world that would never again look up at the night sky in quite the same way.